Did you nap today?
Just woke up from my nap.
You have that nappy kind of vibe to you.
Yep. John, just before we went live, you were talking about pistachios and this and that, and you said it's good if you eat them in moderation.
Yeah, they're very good for you. Just don't
So this is
overdo
the
it.
this is the bone I have to pick with you.
Okay.
You do everything in moderation. You gotta stop. You gotta go out there and just overdo something sometime, somehow.
What makes you think I do everything in moderation?
Well, you drink in moderation, you eat in moderation, you socialize in moderation, you opine not in moderation. That's
Okay,
something you
so what's your
don't do.
problem then? And you should consider this too, given your advancing age. The numbers have piled up. I have put a little bit more attention the last few years into taking care of my body than I used to, because I think that's a good idea. I think you'd like me to not be as moderated in taking care of my body because you would then feel better about the things you don't do. So it's an uncomfortable comparison. Is that the issue?
Now, by the way, there's a
Which
quote.
one of us has major artificial body parts?
There's a quote, John.
Yeah.
Everything in moderation, including moderation.
Well, the Greeks believed that everything was okay in moderation.
And look what happened to them.
I think they
Poof,
lasted a long time, and they also
gone,
were the birthplace.
gone.
Let's see where we are in a couple thousand years. Kurt, it
John,
is our custom to
yes.
kick off season 2 of Smart Drivel with something we have learned. Before you do that, let me ask you an important question. Have you learned anything interesting since we last recorded?
I have, John, but actually, I don't know why I keep going like this. My microphone is right here, but I'm sure you can hear me anyway. Actually, before we get into that, because this is slightly relearning something, but it's something I'd like to discuss.
All right.
And it's actually sweet and shows the human side of me, because I know I always come across as like Mr. Straight line, sane person, rational. And this is something that's just a little more emotional, which I know it's hard to believe with me, but I just returned, which is English for returned, from my annual ski trip with my old college buddies, my 36th annual ski trip.
Where does this rank this last trip among the 36? Was it in the top third?
Well, remember we talked about moderation a little while ago?
I see. You don't remember 24
Right.
out of the
Because
36,
I
so it's in the top third.
because I do not practice moderation when I go on
Get
those
pour
trips.
yourself a glass of water as you talk.
Because I do not practice moderation on those trips, I don't remember. But this is just something I think is kind of sweet because this trip is over the years followed a pattern where of our lives. And the one constant is that we're always together and we always ski really hard. But we used to imbibe even more alcohol than we used to. We used to be single when we started. Then we first got married. Then we had kids and we had mortgages. It's just, and now some of us are not working full time. It's sort of seen this whole wonderful flow of life. But here's what I'm getting at.
But before you tell me the point, I just want to remind you that our job is to say things that our audience might find interesting and entertaining.
So this is what I'm going to tell you. One of the things that this guy said is when we all got together, you can't make old friends.
That's true.
And I thought that was something that's what I relearned this week. You
Yeah.
can't make old friends. There's something about that. I know you've got together with your old buddies, high school
Right.
buddies, and college buddies. There's something about knowing someone so long that no one tries to put on airs. No one can get away with putting on airs.
Yeah.
No one tries any bullshit. And you bring up stuff from when you were, a pimply faced 18-year-old.
You have an extraordinary common ground, and I think you're right that in that environment, you can pretty much say anything to anybody, and it's okay because it's just you know each other that well. So that's a nice environment to be in.
But it was just something I relearned this week. Relearned.
It's a famous quote. I wonder who originated it. You can't make old friends.
Ralph Waldo Emerson.
What are the chances you were just barking out Ralph Waldo Emerson because that came into your mind as opposed to him being the source of that comment?
100%.
I gave you an either or. Which were you saying 100% to?
The former, not the latter.
You barked out Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Yeah.
Did Alfred Lord Tennyson cross your mind as a possible source?
Actually, similar
Mark Twain,
quotes.
perhaps.
Yeah, Mark Twain did definitely.
It was definitely Mark Twain.
Or Will
All right.
Rogers or someone like that, or H.L. Mencken, some highly
So
quotable
while
people.
while you are wistfully remembering your youth, stay there because I want to ask you some questions.
Oh, boy, you do this almost every episode, and I get a lot wrong, but I'm ready.
These are questions about your personal experience. I don't think you can get them wrong, Kurt.
Is this what you learned this week?
It's going to lead into, it's what they
Okay.
call a transition, a segue. I know that those are just, concepts for you, but
Semicolon.
when you were growing up, Kurt, you 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 had,
You grew
assuming you
up, didn't you, Kurt?
no, Kurt, let me just say it differently. When you were living at home in your pre-college years,
Yes.
what newspapers were delivered to your house?
New York Times and
Uh,
the Scarsdale Enquirer.
And what did you must have spent time with the New York Times because you are a student of what's happening in the world. You're a student of history. You appreciate the written word. What were your interactions with the New York Times back then?
Way back when?
Like, did you read the comics?
There were no comics in New York Times, John.
That's true. That was the only trick question I had for you.
I read the sports section. Later on in life, I'd read the sports section and the business section, and then the headlines of the main section.
Yeah.
And throughout it all, the common thread is crossword puzzle.
Yeah, you are an excellent crossword puzzler. I would like all of our listeners and viewers to know
Thank you.
you are probably an exceptional crossworder. Suzanne and I have talked about combining forces to make a puzzle because that would be a nice thing to be able to do. We haven't done that yet, but
I
now that
did
I
that.
you made a puzzle and
Yep.
was it published?
No, I gave it to my friend to fill out. It was junior year abroad studying in London, and I was taking architecture class that bored me silly. So throughout it, I made a crossword puzzle.
Well, we were thinking we might try to get one published once we make it. All right, the New York Times. And tell me what your relationship is with the New York Times today.
Read it online, John. I read the morning briefing every morning, and then if something grabs me even more, I click over to today's edition.
What else do you do with the New York Times?
Well, I also read the New York Post online, John.
Okay, these are only questions about the New York Times.
Oh,
What else do you do with the New York Times and its various properties?
I do their games, John.
Right. In fact, you and I share results pretty much daily for Wordle. You used to play Connections and then you bailed, and Spelling Bee is a favorite of ours. So I ask you these questions because right smack in the middle of our lives and right smack in the middle of our professional careers, the New York Times went through an extraordinary transition. And I was reading a little bit about it recently, and it made me want to dig in and learn more. So I did. So you and I remember back in the early 2000s when digital media and digital advertising showed up and was a threat, an existential threat to any publication, any medium that was supported by traditional advertising.
Especially the Gray Lady.
The Gray Lady, all the news that's fit to print. So back, let's say 2005, the vast majority of the New York Times revenue was advertising revenue,
Eh,
probably 65%.
Yeah.
It drove the proverbial financial bus. Print advertising was very profitable, very lucrative, classifieds, very lucrative, and subscriptions made up the balance, but they wanted as many subscriptions as they could get so that they could charge advertisers more because they were reaching more people.
Guaranteed eyeballs.
Yeah,
And then they
so
all said, oh, but we have 70% walk up. So really, our numbers are 8 billion.
well, they're actually audited. Publications, newspapers, and magazines are actually audited by an organization called the Audit Bureau of Circulation, and
Yeah.
they're there to make sure that the
ABC.
audiences, the ABC, they're there to make sure that the audiences that were promised to advertisers and the ad rates were based on are indeed delivered. So it's 2005. The world is going through a giant transformation. As what was the expression? Digital nickels replaced print dollars. And organizations, businesses like the New York Times were completely vulnerable to being knocked off the face of the earth. And in fact, many organizations were never able to make the transition. So, the Tribune Company owned the Chicago Tribune and the LA Times, and ultimately had to file for bankruptcy. There are a lot of other newspapers that went through that. Time
San
Inc., Time
Francisco
Magazine,
Chronicle. Mhm.
Time Magazine, Sports Illustrated used to be and didn't make the transition. And there are a lot of examples of that. But I'm telling this story because the New York Times has gone through an extraordinary and successful, albeit painful, transformation of its business from a business that was almost entirely ad supported, print ad supported 20 years ago, to a business that is almost entirely subscription or consumer paid. So advertiser paid versus consumer paid. And
Two reasons why.
there are two reasons why. Okay.
First is they got in bed with some credit card companies, like American Express, who gives you a digital credit to the New York Times if you're a member of one of their cards. So you pay for it, but you as a consumer get credited back. So it's sort of a win-win-win. And number two is they bought a little game called Wordle.
Yeah, but that was just a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, they were almost out of
Wordle,
business a couple of years ago.
Wordle was created, during COVID, and they bought it for like $1 million. But it reflects
Exactly.
the transition. They basically went from a news product
Mm-hmm.
to this bundle of daily habits.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, there's some news, but news in a world of free digital news everywhere ain't what it used to be. Classifieds in a world of Craigslist ain't what it used to be. And advertising in a world of Google and Facebook ain't what it used to be. But they created these bundles, New York Times Cooking, all of the games that you and I play, including Wordle, Wirecutter, The Athletic they bought a number of years ago. They have podcasts, and they have completely rebuilt their business model, completely rebuilt their organization, and completely repositioned their product. That rarely happens. And 20 years later, they went from having like a couple of million subscribers to more than 12 million subscribers in 2025. It's an extraordinary story of transformation, and I didn't pay much attention to it until I saw this thing. And the truth is, you and I spend a lot of time playing the games and doing their non-tradition. It's not a news product anymore.
I use their cooking app, and I
You do
bought all
use the
my,
cooking app?
oh yeah, and I bought all my Christmas presents off of Wirecutter suggestions. By the
Yeah,
way,
Wirecutter is great.
their suggestions on LL Bean sheets is the most comfortable sheets. They're dead on correct. I love them.
Excellent. So 65% advertising in 2005, 70 to 75%. I'm sorry, 25% advertising now. A complete transformation. They pulled it off, and I want to acknowledge that. And it's worth digging into. It's a fast look. They made a lot of mistakes, and there were a lot of pain, and the tension between the traditional news side versus this other side has probably been a nightmare for management and for the people involved. But they basically created an entire consumer platform as opposed to being an advertising supported publisher.
That you're right, which they needed to. I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and one of my fellow panelists said that among Google, Amazon,
Facebook.
probably, yes, Meta, 90% of all advertising is
Right, online.
runs through those three. 90%. That means that every other ad supported thing or used to be ad supported thing had to fight for 10% of the revenue. That's crazy.
Basically, if you publish content in this world, the way that publishers have been paid historically is one of two ways. You get people to buy your content, subscriptions, or you get advertisers to pay you to be seen by your audience. And that's pretty much the business model of every media company out there. And this industry went through big honkin' ass change, and very few navigated it as successfully, it appears,
Okay.
as the New York Times.
John, that's not drivel at all, but I'll take it because it's smart.
Okay, and I thought it was something I learned and I could share, and hopefully
No,
you
it
found
is.
it
I'm
interesting too.
really enjoying it. I was just trying to put it under the auspices of smart drivel. It's not dribble, it's smart, so it still fits.
All right, well, hopefully, we won't spend too much time there. We're probably overweight in this episode at this point on smart, so let's get to some drivel.
John, you were born, right?
No one asks setup questions just as well as you do, Kurt. Yes, there's an ample amount of evidence that I was born.
John, you have a birthday, right?
Yes, Kurt, because I was born and the calendar had been invented by then, I indeed have a birthday.
And April 20th, your birthday, it's pretty unique, right?
I think it's no more unique than anyone else's birthday.
Do you know do you know a lot of the people that were born on April 20th?
I do know a few famous people who were born, and I'm also aware of the fact that 420 is part of the drug subculture, and it's the time you smoke weed. And apparently, some California high school back in the 70s, they met after school at 420
Dude,
rather,
dude. Yeah.
420.
Yeah, it was up
So
in Marin County.
I indeed,
Okay.
and I do know some famous people who had this birthday.
Well, here's what I learned. And you're going to say, Kurt, everyone knows that because you're sort of a quantitative geek and I'm not. But
A
here's,
geek.
yeah. Have you ever, quantitative geek, have you ever heard of
I can do math. It's true.
the birthday paradox?
I don't think I have.
Okay. This blew my mind.
Okay.
I don't want to get the facts right. So, okay.
Is this something you're torqued off about?
No, no, no. This messed with my brain in a cool way. Okay, John, if you walk into a room called a bar, right? And you see 22 other people in there. So there's just 23 people total.
Yeah.
There's a better than 50% chance that two people in there have to share the same birthday.
I'm gonna have to think for a second.
So here's
So-
the thing. Here's what
so-
makes your brain say that can't be true. There's
Because
365 birthdays in a year, and there's
we
only
all have an
23
equal
people.
chance of being born on those days, even though some months are more popular based on
Over
consent.
50% chance that you will share a pair
All
in
right,
there.
all right, explain that to me because my head currently hurts.
Exactly. Probability, John. It's all probability. You're not looking for 23 people to 365. You're looking for pairs, right? So here's what it is. 23 people equals 253 pairs potentials, right? Each pair has a chance for a match. So the odds pile up way faster than you think.
So it's 253 over 365, which is greater than half.
So I don't know what the math is, but basically, any big dinner party, there's a chance that you've been to that two people share the same birthday.
I feel like I'm looking at one of those funny mirrors that distort your body, but this is working on my brain.
So here's the thing. Ready? 23 people, basically coin flip that you'll find a match.
Because there are so many possible match combinations.
50%, basically. 30 people, only 7 more, boom, goes up to 70%. If you have 50 people in a room, it's basically a lock that you'll find people that share the same birthday. Only 50 people, because it goes up to 97%. Probability.
Right. I'm going to accept that. And I see the mathematical argument, which I'm not yet accepting as making sense in my brain, but I see the argument.
Well, it's kind of similar to not the argument, but kind of similar to the same probability fact that we always used to blow our brain of. If you started the month with 1 penny and doubled that.
That's about the law of compounding. That's for real.
Right.
That is, I believe that compounding and inertia are probably the two greatest forces in the universe.
So I found that fascinating, John.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to spend more time thinking about it. It's like
the birthday
it's like
paradox.
it's like the whole mathematical conundrum of let's make a deal, where you pick one of 3 and there's no goat behind it, and you're left with 2. Should you change your guess? And the answer is yes, but that's not necessarily intuitive, but there's a whole set of math behind it.
Or if you are doing heads or tails, flipping a coin,
Not 50-50.
and after 99 times it all came up heads, the odds are still the same that it'll come up heads again
Yes,
for the
there's no
100th.
such thing as a hot hand.
There's no such
Just
thing as a
because,
hot hand. It's just because it
right.
went up one a bunch
Yeah.
of times doesn't mean it's. But
Yeah.
again, that's not the way because we try to rationalize things as human.
We try to make sense of things. All right.
I brought some
I,
smart, John. I brought some smart.
you did. That is, I'm going to have to spend more time with that. Thank you for that. I'm not going to share with you a pet peeve. I'm going to provoke you, and tap into one of your deep-seated pet peeves at the
With
risk of
society,
going off, uh, at the risk of this episode going off a cliff, like this topic has done for us before. I
bring
came,
it on,
I
John.
came across a quote, from a well-known basketball coach, college basketball coach. I don't know why it's back in the news because it was originally a quote from a press conference, post-game press conference back in February of 2025.
Not that far.
Tom Izzo, the coach of Michigan State, who is an
Was yeah.
old school, hard ass kind of coach, made the following comment during the press conference, quote, "You play real good, you start. You don't play as good, you work your way back in. That's the American way, except America has gotten soft." Which is a rant that you've gone down. He was merely making the point that,
Grammatically incorrect, but yes.
I don't think that's necessarily the biggest point, but I don't think he was making a political speech as much as he was talking about coaching philosophy, about how playing time gets doled out. You earn it through performance. It's
Yeah.
merit based,
Yeah.
but he talks about this trophy generation
Yeah.
and how the notion of accountability isn't quite as embraced as it used to be.
Makes me
So
sad for the future, John. Sad for the future. Though I do think I've actually been a little, to contradict the way you thought I'd go, I've seen a little ray of hope lately because I've spent a bunch of time recently with some younger folk in their 20s. And
are they your children or
some of
people?
them and some of
Okay.
their friends.
Yeah.
And I'm actually a little hopeful because I see that now they've been out in the working world for a while.
Bit of
They
a change in perspective. Yeah.
they've taken their lumps a little bit. Things have been shaken up, and now they're ready to do stuff where beforehand they never would have. But I think what Tom Izzo said is the same thing that's been bothering me for a long time. And I even talked about it last week. Grade inflation.
Yeah. I mean,
Ridiculous.
it's a lot of
I mean, what was
inflation. I
your
mean, the
grade?
whole,
What was your GPA in college? Like 2.4?
I believe it started with a 3, but I do not remember it. And I don't believe I was the beneficiary of inflation
You
because
weren't, John, because it didn't
there,
exist back then. The
it
gentleman
actually,
fee.
it didn't exist and my academic effort barely existed. So it was the right number for me.
But at one point, a C was the middle ground, the median, right? And
Yeah.
now I think I've said this, but I looked at one of my son's report, whatever, in college, report card. I don't know what the
Transcript,
transcript, but it showed the median grade
right?
across the board, A minus.
Oh, that's a bit rough. It reminds me a little bit of the challenging phenomenon that a lot of kids who go to Harvard experience, and I'm sure it's similar where you went to school at Dartmouth. You have a bunch of people that were used to being the top of their class and in pretty much everything. And then suddenly, mathematically, half of them are below average. Now, if everyone's getting an A minus, they have turned that on its head. But the truth is, mathematically, half of them are below average. That's how
And
that works.
therefore they drop out, they're depressed, they're sad. Why
There's
don't you
real
give a shout
consequences. They're
out?
not prepared to fail.
Why don't you give a shout out to where we learned that from? Our boy Sean.
What did we learn from Sean?
Sean Atkins, the happy guy. He's the one that said he was at Harvard and he did this research that
Oh, I
said
don't remember that. I don't think that was his name
99% of the
either.
people are unhappy.
I don't think his last name. I don't think that's his name. But yes, he was a happiness
Sean, you're right. Archer. Anyway,
acre, yeah, something
we'll
like
put
that.
it
But
in the notes.
yeah, it's an interesting topic. But I thought Tom Izzo would become one of your heroes because he did point out that some of our current attitudes among younger people when it comes to competition and accountability is more it's given to you than it's earned. And
I
there are
would
consequences for not doing as well.
I would say people our it's mostly the younger generation, but I think people our age have a sense of entitlement as well. Certain ilks of people go into stores or restaurants with a sense of entitlement. Get over yourself.
It's a
Everyone's
tough
worth.
attitude. I agree. So here I do feel entitled to tell you the truth. I feel entitled for you to say something funny because we're entering the last segment of the podcast, which is learn, rant, laugh. Kurt, make me laugh.
Okay, before that, I just want to tell you, I have a very quick
I
rant.
made you laugh. That's good.
Thank you. I was skiing this last week. Did I mention
We all
that?
know that.
Yeah. And uh two things about the skiing. Number one, uh I was on one lift and it's an 8-person lift.
Wow, it's not a quad, it's an octo.
A guy sat in the middle. There was like two women, then he and his buddy, and then three of us. So
He
we
was
had,
8 wide?
yeah, we
I've
had
never been on a
seven.
lift that wide.
Anyway, he started when he got on, he cranked a speaker
Oh
of
God.
the screaming punk rock, like
And you
the,
could all hear it.
and one of my friends who I was sitting next to said, I got to say something. And I said, to what end? Let's just go. And after about 2/3, I couldn't take it. I said, excuse me, would you please turn that down? You know what he said? Turn it up. I
Oh.
said, no, turn it down. Pissed me off. Put it in your ears. Don't let me
Yeah,
do
I
it. It's
think there's a larger theme of people doing what they want to do without considering how it affects the people around them. That is a big pet peeve of mine as a theme. Say something funny.
this is a pet peeve that's funny. The word phonetically doesn't even start with an F.
That's good. That's good. It's like you know what that reminds me. That's good. I don't think I've ever heard that. The word phonetically doesn't even start with. So that you know what that reminds me of?
But that's ridiculous.
It is. You know what's just as ridiculous, and I'm sure we've discussed it at some point, is the word monosyllabic
Yeah.
has a
Right.
gazillion syllables.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does anyone think these things through first?
Phonetically doesn't begin with an F. I'll tell
Yeah,
you something else that was
that's a good,
funny.
that is a good one. That's a good, nice drivel.
And I think I might have shared this with you, but I saw something the other day and I have to get it right. People are clever.
Oh, yes. Yes, they are very clever.
So this is I saw, and it was a quote, and it said, I won't back down by Tom
Tom
Petty.
Petty.
And then underneath it, it said, I may readjust my stance if you have a convincing argument. Tom Reasonable.
That's good. That's very good. You know, I spend too much time looking at that
Hey,
kind of
not
stuff.
Petty, reasonable. So he doesn't back, he won't
No,
back.
I got it. I got it. But when you take the collective humor of a lot of people, there's going to be some funny stuff that rises to the top. In fact, I'm going to read you a tweet that I saw last week.
Ready.
All right, I'm going to read it because I want to make sure I'm true to the original source. I
You want
can't
my
really tell you
glasses?
much about the guy who published it because all I know his name is Doc,
With a C?
DOC.
Okay.
So I can't give him any more credit than that. And his profile photo is a German Shepherd. And I'm sure this is something that's been shared by many people. So when you have one of those I hate my job kind of days, he
Know anything
recommends you
about
do
that?
this. He recommends you do this. On your way home, stop at the pharmacy, go to the thermometer section, purchase a rectal thermometer made by Johnson and Johnson. Make sure it's Johnson and Johnson brand, okay? When you get home, lock your doors, close the curtains, disconnect your phone so no one's going to bother you, change into comfortable clothing, sit in your favorite chair, open the package, and then remove the thermometer and place it on a flat surface so that it will not become chipped or broken. Now the fun part begins. Take out the literature from the box and read it carefully. You will notice in small print there is a statement. Quote, every rectal thermometer made by Johnson and Johnson is personally tested and then sanitized. End quote. Now close your
Right.
eyes. Now close your eyes and repeat out loud 5 times. I am so glad I do not work in the thermometer quality control department at Johnson and Johnson.
How many did you get today, Phil? 15. Oh, you're slowing down. I was at 37.
So What is one of our favorite words that starts with an A and ends with an L? Not anal, based on what I just said with the rectal. Don't go there.
And it's not Apple.
That doesn't end with an L.
I know that, but it sounds like it does.
It
Phonetically,
does
it
sound like it phonetically. I always like the word pterodactyl starting PT. So the word is
pneumonia.
apocryphal. Okay. It's one of our faves. That story is apocryphal. There's no way that there are people doing that. But the reason I shared it is it's a funny concept. And secondly, it reminded me of something that is true.
Boy,
I met a guy a number of years ago. Our sons were on the same baseball team. He is a cardiologist. He's a surgeon. He does a lot of catheterization and stuff like that. Really good guy. I believe he went to Dartmouth Medical School, as a matter of fact, but you don't know him
nope,
because you didn't go to Dartmouth Medical School.
nope.
He told a story that is true that that I'm not likely to forget. And you and I should be glad we didn't go to medical school back in the day, whenever that is. When they were learning about conducting prostate exams, they had to perform that on each other in class. So this was all men. Obviously, you picked a partner and had to practice on each other. And for that reason, I am glad I'm not a doctor.
I would say, can we all raise our hands, please, and pick the one with the smallest hands?
Yeah, and then don't shake afterwards when you're done. But could you imagine having to do that in medical school?
Look, I'm glad they did, actually. Having been the recipient of many prostate exams, I'm glad that they did
Including some of them that were done by doctors.
practice. All right, John. Thank you for this
I think
episode.
that's the right place to end.
I do too.
We learned
Well,
some stuff. We ranted a little bit. We had a couple of yucks, which is really our goal here. And if it got a little too serious, then we're sorry. That's going to happen sometimes. Although ending with rectal exams and rectal thermometer quality assurance doesn't sound like it got all that serious. So true
Can't
to
go
our
wrong
brand.
with that.
All right. Well, listen, thank you for joining us, everybody. We will be back next time with another brand new episode of Smart Drivel, Learn, Laugh, Pray, Love, whatever we're calling ourselves these days. Learn,
Rant,
rant, laugh. Okay. Season 2 continues. Thank you all very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.